I could tell you how many degrees Dr. Grant has, how many books he's published, the articles that he's written, the talks that he's given, the marathons that he's run, the institutions he has established, and it would be quite a fitting way to celebrate the gifts that God has given to him. They're astounding. But as you'll hear in just a moment, that's not how he defines success. That's not how the Lord defines success. And the man that he's going to tell you about, that was not how he defined success. Dr. Grant lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and he is a pastor, and he loves people. He loves his sheep. He loves to encourage and to inspire. For me personally, in 2005, I was in Memphis, and I was going to my first talk that was associated with classical Christian schools. And Dr. Grant told a story, and I was jazzed. I was excited. He told a story that I believe incarnates one of the life quotes for Dr. Grant. It comes from Thomas Chalmers. And that quote is, "Regardless how large, your vision is too small." It inspired me personally. It inspired members of our staff through various talks to throw themselves into Christian education wholeheartedly and sometimes ridiculously. This evening is an evening of blessing, and I am so thankful that you've come. Before we invite up Dr. Grant, let me pray and ask the Lord's blessing on our time. Our Father in heaven, you are the giver of ridiculous gifts. You give and give and give and give, and we say simply, thank you. Father, you are so gracious. We thank you for this evening. We thank you for granting safe travel to all of us. We thank you for granting the opportunity for us to gather, to encourage one another, and to be encouraged. Father, we thank you for George Grant, for the way that you have gifted, called, equipped, and set before him good works to do. We ask that you would bless him, that you would bless our evening, and we do all of this in your precious and holy name. Amen. It's my pleasure to share with you this evening Dr. George Grant. Thank you.
Well, what a great delight to be with you this evening. Thank you for taking time out of your valuable... See, I'm getting feedback already. Out of your valuable week and your time to come this evening. I am just a little surprised that all of this came together so quickly, and am so delighted. And Charlie asked me to talk about one of the things that I love talking about most. Eudora Welty, the great Southern woman of letters from the last generation, once said, "If you want someone to know something, tell them. If you want somebody to understand something, tell them again. But if you want somebody to do something, tell them a story." So tonight, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story of an astonishing life that made a huge impact on a whole host of folks. But before we actually get to the story, we need to define some terms. In his preface to Milton's Paradise Lost, C.S. Lewis wrote, "The first qualification for judging anything, any piece of workmanship, say, from a corkscrew to a cathedral, is to know what it is. It is to know what it was intended to do, how it was intended to be used." So if the corkscrew or the cathedral is mistaken for something else, then though it is a good thing out of its place is of little use at all. If you mistakenly think that the corkscrew is for opening cans, or the cathedral for entertaining tour groups, you can really say nothing intelligible about them. The first thing that you need to know about a thing is what the thing was meant to be. Now, to be sure, what is true of corkscrews and cathedrals is just as true about education. Part of the reason that so many of us misapprehend the meaning of an event such as this discussion about education is that we fail to grasp just what it is meant to be. We've practically forgotten what it is for. The Prince of Preachers, Charles Haddon Spurgeon, once wrote in his wonderful John Plowman's Talks, I would have everybody able to read, write, and cipher. Indeed, I don't think that a man can know too much, but mark you, the knowing of these things is not education. And there are millions of your reading and writing folk who are as ignorant as neighbor Norton's calf. Yeah, apparently you know some of those people. The truth is that we've forgotten what education is for. We've forgotten what it is. And as a result, we flail about with these notions of trade schools, which is what most of our universities are, sort of fitting people for jobs that won't even exist in 10 years. But we think that education is really all about resume building, when in fact those resumes will be obsolete in 10 years. Perhaps no other person in all of history helps me understand just what education is, what it was meant to do, than Jan Amos Comenius. He was born in 1592 and he died in 1670. He was, by almost any modern definition, not a success. And yet his impact was wide, sweeping, overwhelming in a host of the great heroes of the faith. Herman Bavinck called him the greatest figure of the second generation of reformers. And yet he is practically forgotten today. Though Andrew Bonar said he was the truest heir of Huss, the chief inspiration of Chalmers, and the first model for Carey, he is rarely mentioned alongside those men. Although J. Hudson Taylor said he was the single greatest innovator of missions, education, and literature during the Protestant Reformation, he is hardly remembered. Though Abraham Kuyper said he was the father of modern Christian education, his vision of substantive and systematic discipleship, making certain that real and glorious legacy-giving education is made accessible, affordable, and sustainable for anyone and everyone is only infrequently practiced. And though Francis Schaeffer said that without Jan Amos Comenius, the idea of forging a Christian worldview would be practically impossible for us, his name is almost never mentioned. He was astonishingly diverse in both his interests and endeavors. Comenius helped to shape the educational systems of Holland, Sweden, Prussia, Scotland, and Puritan New England. He launched missionary outreaches to Jews and Turks, Gypsies and Eastern Orthodox, Catholics and liberals. He initiated projects to create a comprehensive Christian encyclopedia, a translation of the scriptures in the Turkish and Arabic languages. He wrote and published a veritable library of books of inspiration educational theory, cultural criticism, history, practical devotion, exposition, and theology. He was asked to lead both King's College in Cambridge and Harvard College in America. He served the Swedish king as a chaplain. He developed innovative plans for a Christian university program, and he was able to do all of this despite suffering a whole host of personal tragedies, living most of his life in uncertain and impoverished exile. As his contemporary Cotton Mather argued, he was a man of extraordinary accomplishments amidst inordinate adversity. It is a marvel that he is not remembered as such. So let me tell you his story. It's an amazing story. He was born in eastern Moravia, in what is today the Czech Republic, in the rich Protestant legacy that traced its roots all the way back to Jan Milic, a generation before Jan Hus, 100 years before the time that Martin Luther first entered the monastery as an Augustinian monk. Jan Hus, Jerome of Prague, they were among the host of heroes who were what historians today call the morning stars of the Reformation. In the very difficult days of the 14th century, you all recall those difficult days. Run through your mind all of the great events in the 14th century. You'll remember, oh yeah, the Black Death, the 100 Years' War, the Hanseatic League, the rise of scholasticism. It was almost as if the whole of the world was falling apart, and the church right along with it. The Babylonian captivity of the church and the Great Schism. 14th century was bad. A bad, bad time. And in the midst of that bad, bad time, God in his grace raised up this little movement in an out-of-the-way corner of Europe and began to lay the foundations for real and substantive reform. Comenius came along many generations later, but he was catechized and educated in the rich Reformed tradition of the day by godly parents. Alas, the first of many tragedies struck his happy home when Comenius was just 12. Both of his parents died in a virulent outbreak of the plague. Nevertheless, because he had shown such great academic promise, his little village just outside of Prague determined that this one bright orphan should be able to realize his calling and to maximize his giftings. And so he was sent off to Heidelberg to study theology. In 1616, having completed his studies, he returned home to teach in the little parish school where he had once been a student. Less than 18 months later, he was ordained into the Hussite Reformed Church and served the little congregation there in Falnik, where he married his childhood sweetheart and began his family. But that was when the second great tragedy of his life struck. Just 2 years later, the first decisive battle of the 30 Years' War took place at White Mountain, just outside of Prague. The Habsburg Catholics overwhelmed the Protestant Czech forces, and a fierce new persecution was imposed on the Reformed community throughout the land. Comenius, like virtually all of the other pastors, was forced into hiding. But the next month, another outbreak of the plague took the lives of his beloved wife and their 2 young children. It was just the beginning of a life marked by suffering, sadness, and exile. Shortly thereafter, Comenius was asked to take what was left of a kind of exile community hiding in the mountains and guide them. A number of the men came to him and said, "What shall we do? Where shall we go? How shall we live?" Comenius, riven with grief himself, had no earthly idea. His only response was to take resort to the Scriptures. And so with the only courage that he knew he could muster, he simply stood before them with tears streaming down his face, and he simply said, "I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as living and holy sacrifices, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may be able to prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." And he stopped. He had no other words to offer, no words of his own. But the men were thunderstruck, and they realized this was the calling of their lives, that they would be wanderers for the rest of their lives, and their children would be wanderers, and their children's children would be wanderers. That little band of Moravian brethren would live by Romans 12, 1 and 2, over the course of multiple generations. Comenius led a large contingent of the men and their families across the mountains into southern Poland, where they built a makeshift village in order to rebuild their lives, their families, and their little church. It was then that Comenius began writing, partly as a way to work out his grief, partly as a way to pastor his flock, partly as a way to express gifts that he felt like were foundering now that he was really just a part of a refugee community. He began to write in snippets and then eventually in torrents. He wrote such classics as The Labyrinth of This World, which is a beautiful allegory of the Christian life, written almost a half a century before Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and which clearly Bunyan borrowed from heavily. He wrote A Man of Sorrows, a classic meditation on the substitutionary work of Christ on the cross, a brilliant treatise. He also began to travel to other Protestant lands to advocate for the cause of his bedraggled little Moravian brethren, uprooted from their homeland, impoverished and harried. And the genius of Comenius was almost immediately recognized, not only by the grateful little community of Reformed exiles huddled together in the mountain villages of southern Poland, but also by the wider church. In the years that followed, he entertained invitations to teach and live in cities like London and Boston and Cambridge and Stockholm and Paris and Amsterdam and Wittenberg and Geneva. He was called on to devise a universal Christian curriculum, to reform educational systems, to administer colleges, to oversee theological projects, to supervise the publishing projects. He corresponded with the infamous Cardinal Richelieu, as well as with the philosopher René Descartes and Cotton Mather and Oliver Cromwell and Charles X of Sweden and the industrious Louis Daguerre. He was among the most influential and sought-after men of his day. But he never left his people. he couldn't. He never left the hovels, the makeshift shacks in southern Poland. He knew who his people were. He knew what his calling was. And however wide his gifts, he knew where home was. The pastoral responsibility for his little beleaguered flock always remained first and foremost his greatest concern. He attempted to utilize every opportunity and every contact for their sake, not his. Meanwhile, despite the insecurity of living in exile on very limited resources, his vast vision for missionary outreach and educational reform never dimmed. Anytime that he or the elders talked about doing a project, he would remind them, we're not adding something to our agenda. We're multiplying the kingdom. And so, always the optimist, he continued to devise new plans, to hammer out new strategies and formulate new projects. In 1656, after a lifetime of hardship and opportunities deferred, tragedy struck Comenius again. Polish troops swept in and burned and looted the Moravian villages, harrowing the survivors across the border. They had lost everything again, including 14 manuscripts that the Comenius had been working on, all burned, all gone. Comenius and the other refugees were scattered across Europe on estates throughout the German and Dutch provinces. There they would live out their remaining days as strangers in yet another strange land. But Comenius, even in old age, was energetic as always. He set his hands to a host of new projects. Though he lost all of those unpublished manuscripts, his printing press, and all of his worldly goods, he was unshaken in his confidence in the gospel to change the course of both men and nations. He had set his ultimate hope on the day that Christ would make manifest his new heavens and new earth. But he was also steadfast in the certainty that a deposit of that future glory would be made in the tired domains of the old heavens and the old earth. To his dying day, he lived in accordance with that notion, planning for the evangelization of Muslims and gypsies, undertaking the first complete translation of the Bible in the Turkish and Arabic languages, and refining his vision for what he called the Pan-Sophic Collegium, a comprehensive Christian worldview curriculum rooted in the classics, all taught from a Christian perspective. When he died at the age of 78, he left behind a glorious legacy, not of this world, that would inspire the likes of Whitefield, Spurgeon, Zinzendorf, Chalmers, Kuyper, Schaeffer, and a host of others, as well as providing a powerful reminder that success in the kingdom rarely looks like success in the world. Over and over and over again in his writings, he would talk about those future days, those far-off days, our days, when if the Christian worldview that would not prevail, men would be bound in chains of tyranny across vast swaths of the earth's crust. He talked about the fact that if we did not bring the gospel clearly, graciously, forthrightly, and powerfully to the worlds of Islam, that Islam would continue to be a scourge on the face of the earth and harry Christian civilizations out of existence. He was no prophet. He just had eyes to see what was very evidently the workings of this poor fallen world. There were several things that Comenius did in his life that I think are astonishing and incredibly applicable to us. First of all, he knew that his little Moravian brethren movement, that they were a dying breed, that they were a tiny refugee community, they harried out of homeland with no substance and no means, and yet he believed that somehow, some way, God could use that little community for great kingdom impact. He constantly exhorted them with their motto verse. I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as living and holy sacrifices, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may be able to prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. So it probably shouldn't surprise us that when young men like John and Charles Wesley and George Whitefield were fitfully trying to figure out what it was that God was calling them to, that they would run across a handful of Moravian brethren missionaries. The same Moravian missionaries who had sent the first Western missionaries to Greenland and to the Caribbean. And they would inspire Whitefield and Wesley with a vision of evangelism and of kingdom expansion, and that would be used to launch the Great Awakening. Probably shouldn't surprise us that the earliest days of Harvard College, when the school was still primarily aimed at training pastors, that the comprehensive Christian worldview vision of Comenius's Pan-Sophic Collegium should inspire men like Cotton Mather to broaden the curriculum, to make Harvard the spawning ground for what would become the world's greatest experiment in liberty. It probably shouldn't surprise us that the Moravian brethren inspired the planting of little Christian schools, tiny Christian schools with few resources and little to go on but faith and vision to shape a whole new generation and to raise up people who knew where they were from, who had a sense of place and a sense of calling, and who could not be deterred from raising up a whole new generation that would be better equipped than any of us are to face the challenges of this poor fallen world. People like Groen van Prinsterer and Merle Daubigny and Abraham Kuyper looked to the vision of this obscure Moravian brethren, Jan Amos Comenius, and it enabled them to launch their reforming visions. People looked to his literature and his extraordinarily creative imagination. Men like Philip Schaff and Hans Ruckmacher and Francis Schaeffer, and saw a model for how we could bring reformation to the arts, so that art and music and literature could flower once again as the peculiar fruit of Christian civilization and lead the world to raise up a whole new generation of Bachs and Rembrandts. Bless the world and changed the world. Probably shouldn't surprise us that men like George Whitefield and Thomas Chalmers and William Carey looked to Jan Amos Comenius and saw the inspiration for a whole new way to approach strategic missions to reach the last and the least. A few years ago, I was in northern Iraq, in the city of Kirkuk. I was privileged to speak in a little Presbyterian church there that had been planted by Scottish missionaries in the 1840s. They were disciples of Thomas Chalmers from New College, Edinburgh. They found their way to the Zagros Mountains and made their way among the Kurdish and Mede peoples, planted a little Presbyterian church, and it survives to this day. I knew about the Presbyterian church. It was on my bucket list of things to do. And when you're in Iraq, you have a bucket list. So I knew I wanted to go there. And when I came into the gated yard for the little church, my breath was taken away when I saw the name of the church. Jan Amos Comenius Memorial Church of the Brethren. And I thought, what an incredible impact. The sweet fellowship that I had with believers there reminded me that we have such a rich inheritance. How can we not go to the ends of the earth? How can we not go to the ends of Spokane to bring the hope of a renewal of our civilization, a hope for our families, a wholesomeness to the art, the music, the literature, the ideas that our children will pass on to their children? How can we not be inspired by Jan Amos Comenius when he reaches that far? One of the things about Comenius was he really saw that education had a greater purpose than simply fitting young people for future jobs or to fill out their resumes. As Comenius said in the Labyrinth of This World, the whole purpose of discipleship is to make souls fat. I love that. I just had a great dinner. And there's so much about being fat that I really love. But having a fat soul, in the biblical sense, fully fed, really rich, satisfied, blessed. That's what we want the souls of our children to be. I don't know about you, but I'm not particularly pleased with our culture. I'm not pleased with what the children or grandchildren might be confronted with when they walk into a movie theater or even into a toy store, for heaven's sakes. I hate what it is that they're exposed to at every moment. They're one click away from a mindless perversion of the sort that we can hardly even imagine. And yet, it's peculiar, isn't it? We tend to think of culture as something that's out there. Comenius believed that culture is what we make right where we are. He believed that we were called to create such a vibrant, dynamic, living, biblical culture that it stands out like a beacon light in the midst of the world. It's a supremely biblical image, isn't it? Light on the hill, salt of the earth. One of the reasons that we're so displeased with our culture is that we've really not grasped that Comenius-like commitment to make the culture right where we are. Whether it's in huts and hovels on the edge of the Polish forest, or scattered in places like Herrnhut and Zinzendorf's estate, as the exiles and refugees, and the small apartments in inner city Amsterdam, or right here, on the edge of the Palouse in Spokane and the Pacific Northwest. Eudora Welty was right. We could have talked theoretically tonight about classical Christian education, about the fact that our children can absorb so much more than we give them credit for, that they can go so much farther than we could have ever imagined, that they could have lives of substance. We could talk about the carefully crafted curricula. We could talk about the Pan-Sophic Collegium, but for me, just the story of Comenius, in the midst of all of his adversity, simply saying, I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, present yourselves as living sacrifices acceptable to God. This is your spiritual service of worship. So do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may be able to prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, walk in the footsteps of the heroes who have gone before us, and see what God will do in this place, at this time. If not us, who? If not now, when? I'm really excited about the legacy that has already been laid by so many of you, the labors that you have expended. But brothers and sisters, I pray, we ain't seen nothing yet, that the future portends far greater things than this. Amen and amen. All right. I'm going to stop right there. And so let's do some Q&A. Any question? Any question at all? Except I don't know what the score of the Houston Indy game is, so I can't answer that question. You're all missing it on my behalf. Of course, the Seahawks are not playing, so it probably doesn't matter to you. But. All right, questions? What would you like to ask? Yes.
Does Comenius have any books that are in print, and where should we go to find them, and what are they called?
Great. The two books that I mentioned, The Labyrinth of This World, that is his allegory. That is available, and you can find it various translations on Amazon, and then the substitutionary work of Christ on the cross. That also is available. Sometimes that is titled, there's one English translation of that is titled simply Man of Sorrows. So those two are readily available. There are lots of books about Comenius that are floating about of various qualities. Most of the stuff is translated from the Czech. He is a Czech national hero, but that oftentimes the translations are pretty muddy. So there's not a lot that is out there, but there are some things. There's a little paperback published by a Scottish publishing house that is a children's biography of Comenius, which is really good. By the way, there's a wonderful Rembrandt portrait of Comenius in existence that I really love. There's also a fantastic pen and ink portrait of him when he was a younger man, standing next to one of his mentors, who has just about the best beard that I've ever seen in my life, far better than anything that you can find in a Seattle coffee shop. Yes, sir.
You talked a little bit about culture. I was just curious what your opinion was of the statement, as culture rises, civilization falls.
There is a maxim that floats about, as culture rises, civilization falls, that assumes definitions of both civilization and culture that I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily accept. Henry Van Til, wonderful Reformed philosopher of the last generation, said simply, culture is religion externalized. So culture is always a manifestation of the ultimate concerns of any given civilization. So when you look at American pop culture, all that is an outward expression of our inmost faith. So when you look at the culture of, say, the day of the Dutch reformers, when we were producing artists like Rembrandt, that culture and civilization were rising together. So I think the definition that is inherent in that maxim of both civilization and culture are larded with presuppositions that I don't accept. Make sense?
That's okay. Hello, my name is Lara Javorek. I am from the Czech Republic, and I was going to answer the question that the lady had there. Another good book that Komensky wrote was Orbis Pictus, and that was actually the first children's book with pictures in it. And I'm not sure if that one is in print, but...
It is in print. It's a bad translation. You can get it on Amazon.com. I've got a copy, and it is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And of course, she used the proper pronunciation of his name. You'll see in the checkbooks, his name is always Kaminsky, and spelled with a K, not a C, as we spell it here. And by the way, I don't know why we do that. Have you ever figured this out? Paris is not Paris, it's Paris. Rome is not Rome, it's Roma. Why Muscova? Why do we change names to anglicize them? I don't get that. But anyway.
When you talk about do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, how does that inform you specifically in regards to that story you told in your daily life with your family, with your community, with the world in general, and just from the small to the large, this discipline of not conforming to the pattern of this world?
Well, we know what the measure of success or happiness is by looking at, go pick up a People magazine or an Us magazine, a Rolling Stone magazine. You know what the measure of success is in our world, or what the measure of happiness, or the measure of beauty, goodness, and truth. I think what Romans 12:1 and 2 is saying is that we can't take our points of measurement from the world. Instead, the points of measurement have to come from God's Word. And so when we say that we're not going to be conformed to this world, what that means is that every single one of our ideas, all of our assumptions, have to be brought under the bar of Scripture to be examined. And I have to reassess everything that I think, because I am, after all, a 21st century man, just like all of us are. So I've assumed a lot of things. I have to be constantly bringing those under the scrutiny of Scripture, and then I have to reform myself. Right thinking should result in right living. And so what that means is that we've got to cut against the grain. We've got to go in the opposite direction. We've got to hold to different standards. So in practical terms, what that means in Comenius's case was he had all of this possible acclaim from the world, but he knew where he belonged and he stayed there. So what it means for us is not becoming restless when the mundane, ordinary tasks that God has called us to begin to wear on us. The truth is any young mom will tell you, that those things start to wear on us quickly. And we yearn for just a normal night's sleep, please. And yet, here's where God has called us, and this is the beautiful thing, and to persevere in the midst of the ordinary, that's what is truly extraordinary from a biblical perspective. Does that make sense? Other questions? You don't have to wait for a microphone, just shout it out. I'm not waiting for a microphone. Other questions? Yes, sir. How do I know about the Palouse? Who doesn't know about the Palouse? And the great ice dam that supposedly broke and created all of these rolling hills and ripples and all of the rest of it. No, I've actually been here a number of times in the past, and I love this part of the country. We had a long drive. I flew into Lewiston, so I got a chance to see all of the rolling wheat fields, and which are all mown or plowed, and got to enjoy the Palouse all over again. The breadbasket of the West. I guess I actually answered that question, but I poked at it a little bit. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Thank you. Two great questions. Two wonderful things I love talking about. We have three classical schools, classical Christian schools in northern Iraq, working among the Kurdish people. They are the modern heirs of the old Medes from the day of the Medes and the Persians. And so our schools are called the Classical School of the Medes. And all of the upper division students, all of the high school students, are actually my students. They watch video lectures of me teaching history and worldview and all of the weird things that I teach. And I have the opportunity to go over there from time to time and walk with the students. And we have about 3,000 students. All of them virtually come from dominant Muslim homes. They go to these schools knowing that they will receive a Christian worldview, that they will hear the gospel, that the teachers will pray to the Messiah, Jesus, and yet because it's the best education in the region, government officials and others stand in line to get their children and grandchildren enrolled in our schools. We also have 27, well actually 26 now, there was a merger, schools in Indonesia, which is the world's largest Muslim population nation. And that's my son is actually a teacher in the largest of those schools in Indonesia. It's really a remarkable opportunity for us. One of Comenius's strategies in missions was to look for persecuted, isolated peoples and find a way to minister to them. It's what I call a missions wedge. The Kurds have been harried and persecuted by their Islamic brothers for hundreds of years. The Turks have tried to literally snuff them out. And so there was just this remarkable window when, after the first Gulf War, the U.S. imposed a no-fly zone so that Saddam could not continue to gas the Kurds with weapons of mass destruction. And so we saw that as a missions opportunity, and we helped to start schools there. And the Lord has done some just really remarkable things, church plants and all kinds of things that are going on there. And similarly, Indonesia is a peculiar sort of cultural phenomena that occurred when the Sukarno-Suharto decades-long tyranny collapsed in 2001, and we saw the opportunity, established a Christian school. Now there are 26. So what gives me the most hope? You know, it's Thursday night. It's 8 o'clock. You're all here. That gives me hope. People care. They know that we've got to do something. The church is largely asleep, but is at least restless in its sleep. And as a result, I see a great hope. Did you see that choir that was just in front of us? Those bright eyes, those crystalline voices. There's hope. I didn't have an education like they're getting. Did you? No way. Our hope, our dream is that they will stand on our shoulders and therefore reach higher and see further than we ever could have. That's what gives me hope. All right, Charlie, you better get these people home.
Thank you. Fat souls. Love that. Culture is what we make now. Make the culture right where we are. Thank you for coming. This has been an evening I trust that has been a blessing to you. I would like to thank Mirabeau Park Hotel for housing us for the evening. This has been wonderful. Dr. Grant mentioned at the beginning of his talk that he's kind of surprised what happened in the last 3 weeks. As am I. And in large part, it's been because we have some great staff at the Oaks. I'd like to thank our office staff. They've fielded questions that often I hadn't told them the answers to yet. And we provided answers, and then they gave those out. Our office staff was wonderful. Our teachers have done a great job of just letting you know, hey, here's an opportunity and an evening for blessing. So thank you to the Oaks teachers and staff and board. We had a generous Oaks family who helped to underwrite this evening, and we're very thankful for their kindness to make this something where it truly is for you to come, be blessed, and go. Anya Schnell, Ben Palpin, Russ Lipton, Kim Muse, Marcia Harkin, Brent Harkin, were just above and beyond the call of duty to make this evening come together. So thank you all.